Now, here's Michael Smerconish.
The New York Times Magazine has a deep dive into Tesla's autopilot. I want to talk about it. You'll be happy to hear this has nothing to do with my car being hit and run recently. The headline says, "Inside Tesla as Elon Musk pushed an unflinching vision for self-driving cars." Let me just give you a taste of this. It's in my social media right now, and then I'll welcome a special guest. It says this: Elon Musk built his electric car company Tesla around the promise that it represented the future of driving, a phrase emblazoned on the automaker's website. Much of that promise was centered on autopilot, a system of features that could steer, brake, and accelerate the company's sleek electric vehicles on highways. Over and over, Mr. Musk declared that truly autonomous driving was nearly at hand, the day when a Tesla could drive itself, and that the capability would be whisked to drivers over the air in software updates. Unlike technologists at almost every other company working in self-driving vehicles, Musk insisted that autonomy could be achieved solely with cameras tracking their surroundings, but many Tesla engineers questioned whether it was safe enough to rely on cameras without the benefit of other sensing devices, and whether Mr. Musk was promising drivers too much about autopilot's capabilities. Now, those questions are at the heart of an investigation by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration after at least 12 accidents in which Teslas using autopilot drove into parked fire trucks, police cars, and other emergency vehicles, killing one person and injuring 17 others. Great fodder for a conversation with Phil Koopman, who is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. He's worked on autonomous vehicle safety for a quarter century. Dr. Koopman, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
I think people will be shocked to find, I discuss it routinely, but I recognize that I'm not speaking only to Tesla drivers, but rather the vast majority who've never been inside one. But I nevertheless think they would be shocked to find the capabilities that my car does have. And believe me, I don't explore them all. I have to rely on my kids to explain it to me. But I think of when I go to work early on a Saturday morning because I'm driving into Center City, Philadelphia from my home in the suburbs. And when I get onto the Schuylkill Expressway, I will double click the stalk on the right side of my steering wheel, and that will set a temperature as if it's cruise control. Only not only is it cruise control, it's going to steer the car for me all the way into the city. If I hit the turn signal on the left while I'm doing that, it will change lanes for me. There's very little it won't do. And yes, my hands are to be on the wheel, but frankly, it will do most of that, even if my hands aren't at all times on the wheel. And Dr. Koopman, when I first test drove a Tesla, I like to say it the way that Musk does, by the way, my first reaction was to say, wow, how did our government allow this to get? I mean, I love it, but how did our government what level of testing had to be done before this vehicle was greenlit? What's the answer to that?
Any car on the road is self-certified by the car maker. So they run a bunch of tests, federal motor vehicle safety standards, which have nothing at all to do with those features. The tests that need to be run are, do your brakes work? Are your headlights bright enough? When you have low tire pressure, does the little tire pressure light turn on? But for any level of automation, there's no tests at all. This is a country where you can do it if it's not forbidden, and that's what they're doing.
It's shocking to me. So in other words, there's not a moment where the new Y that rolled off the line, mine came off the line just as the pandemic was beginning. When that first model, before it hits the marketplace, there's no government oversight inspection to make sure, like, hey, this autonomous driving, or as they call it, autopilot, meets all of these requirements?
There are no requirements it has to meet in the US. There's no test. The car companies just roll it out and you get to see what happens.
Okay, so in my case, I've made a caveat emptor. I've made a decision. I'm okay with that. I'd like to own it and I'd like to drive it. But who is protecting Dr. Philip Koopman, who is in the lane next to me?
Nobody, really. It's complicated. So I'm glad you brought that point out, because people say, well, I know I'm taking a chance by using whatever technology, but too many people don't talk about the vulnerable road users that are sharing the roads. And I drive a car that has really good safety ratings, in part because that scenario you just pointed out. But when I'm a pedestrian, there's only so many telephone poles to hide behind, right? And so it's the vulnerable road users I really worry about the most.
I think that people who are listening to us right now are mostly shocked to hear this, and that they think that in this country, if that vehicle is on the road, it has met some level of federal safety inspection. And I'm not talking about the state inspection that in my state, your state, we go through once a year.
There's no inspection of individual vehicles. And the FMVSS I mentioned before is just basic vehicle functions. So if there's any sort of advanced automation, the Tesla calls it autopilot, other companies have that. There is absolutely nothing the feds have to say unless there are serious injuries or fatalities, and only then do they step in, as you mentioned earlier.
So you've already explained then this deep dive of the New York Times. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read it, which paints a picture of Elon Musk really pushing, and maybe in some circumstances to the detriment of safety, because he was so eager to bring these vehicles to market. If you read the piece, what reaction do you have to it?
When I read the piece, my reaction was partly not much surprise. Based on what's been going on, that wasn't a surprise, but it's indicative of a company that has a poor safety culture. They're more interested in getting, based on that account, in getting the things out than in doing it safely. And that's a problem. Our country has run on the assumption that the auto manufacturers are trying to do the right thing on safety. And so there's a light regulatory touch. But if somebody tries to game that system, that means there's not a lot in place to mitigate the risk.
It sounds to me like you think we're moving too quickly with regard to autonomous driving, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. What would you say?
I would say that Tesla is doing a lot of risky things. The full self-driving, so-called full self-driving FSD testing. I mean, there's reckless driving. People are running red lights. They're running stop signs. That's just crazy. But that doesn't mean the other companies are doing the same thing. So I don't want to tar the whole industry with the Tesla brush. They're really egregious in how aggressive they're being, and how much they're basically ignoring accepted practices, things like this. The rest of the industry is not without its issues, but Tesla stands out as being a lot more reckless than the rest.
Well, do they stand out because he's a known personality, and that we frankly would be hard pressed to identify the CEO of another major auto manufacturer?
I don't really have much insight into those dynamics. I'm just a safety engineer trying to keep the world safe.
Okay, then tell me this, 25 years from now, what do our roadways look like? Where do you think this is going in the relatively short term?
Well, in the medium term, you see all these companies out there testing on public roads with varying degrees of safety, but the Tesla stuff is clearly much more risky than all the other things I've seen. And the robo-taxis are going to take a while. Maybe the automated trucks come faster. In 25 years, we could be in a good place. But if there's some adverse news events, if some really bad things happen, we might see another winter. There are things called AI winters where it's overhyped and then it just goes away for a decade. We're only a few crashes away from that happening with self-driving car technology. So I don't know how that's going to turn out. We're going to see.
Well, let me ask it in these terms. In 25 years, God willing, if I should be around and able to be in a vehicle, if I were driving down I-95 or the Schuylkill Expressway, looking to my left and my right, how many vehicles do you think are going to be self-driving? And I don't want to get hung up on the lingo, but self-driving in the sense of the driver's really not in control. It's almost like an airplane pilot who is not landing or taking off.
So if self-driving means you can sleep in the back seat, I'd be surprised if it was more than half, because it takes a really long time to turn over the fleet. The average US car is more than 10 years old. So even if we had self-driving cars tomorrow, it's going to take about that long for all the old ones to wear out and get replaced. And we're not going to have them tomorrow that you can go from coast to coast or anything like that. So it's still going to be a mix, I would say, even 25 years from now.
Dr. Koopman, my particular vehicle gets it all done the capabilities that it has. And by the way, I was rejected for the beta program because my driver score was only an 82, and I think they were looking for a 99 or 100. I'm said to be a tailgater. At least that's what and not in the Philadelphia Eagles sense, but rather I'm the guy apparently you don't want behind you on the highway. Anyway, my car's capabilities are all dependent upon cameras, lots of cameras on the exterior. Is Tesla unique in that regard as compared to the other auto manufacturers that you're familiar with?
The other ones all use all the sensors they can get. So the camera
like
only
what?
LiDARs. So that's a laser-based system that does ranging. So think of it as laser-based radar and radars. And some of them use ultrasound for close quarters. They'll use any sensor they can get because it's such a hard problem. As far as I know, Tesla's unique in saying we can do it only with cameras, and I don't see that happening. But we'll see how that turns out.
In other words, you think that their model, from an engineering safety standpoint, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you think it might be deficient.
Well, the issue is that the talking point you hear is, well, eyes are good enough for humans, so they should be good enough for a car. And the problem is that eyes, it isn't just eyes. You have eyes, you have a visual cortex, which does an amazing amount of processing, and you have a brain that can reason about what happens next. And the machine learning systems are statistical boxes that do really cool stuff, but they have no understanding of what's going on in the world. So you need two cameras, really good cameras, and you need a human brain. They don't have the human brain. And so, what I like about make up for that with the other sensors. That's what happens.
What I like about the prospect of the automated driving, if that's the proper way to describe this general subject area, I want to eliminate human factors. If this gets us to, I mean, frankly, I'm one who'd be more trusting of a sound machine or computer than I would a driver who's had cocktails or hasn't slept sufficiently to be operating an 18-wheeler.
The narrative is that humans are terrible drivers, but in fact, even an average human, including the people who do that, goes 100 million miles between fatalities. That's an awful lot of miles. So humans make bad decisions. The whole 94% is human error is actually misinterpretation of the data. That isn't
how so. How so?
94% of the time, a human might have stopped the crash, but it doesn't mean they caused it. And so if you swap out humans for automation, sure, humans can drive drunk. That happens. If you take out the driving under the influence, maybe it's twice as good for humans, but it's still a really high bar to get across. So the cars won't drive drunk, but they can drive really stupid. They have no common sense. If they see something they've never seen before, they often do something bizarre. They get confused easily. So they won't have the same problems as humans, but they'll have different problems. And right now, we're struggling to get to the point where they're even as good as humans, let alone better.
What is the coolest capability that you have seen that is in development? Anything come to mind?
I think the whole notion of cars being able to drive themselves is super cool. When the technology works, it's really amazing. And the problem with safety is you get it working, that's great, but 100 million miles before you have a fatal crash is a huge number of miles. And so if you have something that fails every million miles, you're still 100 times away. So the first hard part is getting it working. The second hard part is getting it working so it basically never fails. And that's the part that we're not there yet on.
There are also some philosophical issues, are there not, that I don't know how a machine can be trained? Aren't there some hypotheticals that you and I could conjure up where the car has to make a decision as to whether the baby gets hit or the old man?
I don't go down the trolley problem tracks. That happens so infrequently to humans. If all that were left was the trolley problem, where do you kill 5 people or do you kill 1 person? And
right,
one of them is special and one's whatever. If that's the only issue we have left, if those are the only deaths, we've won by a factor of 100. So I'm just not going to worry about that till we get there. The ethical issue I worry about is, are they going to deploy safe enough? Are they actually going to deploy safe enough? Or are they going to deploy when they're about to run out of money? Those are the kind of ethical issues I worry about. That's much more here and now.
What other manufacturers are on the vanguard, so that this is not a pure Tesla conversation? Who out there is developing at the same rate that just flies under the radar screen?
Well, I don't know about flying under the radar screen, but the other Tesla, the non-Tesla folks, I mean, Waymo has been deployed without a driver in the vehicle for a long time. You can just go to a certain place in Arizona and near Phoenix, and you can get in a Waymo and you can drive around and there's no driver, and that's been going on for a long time. So saying that Tesla's ahead is like, well, I don't see that they're ahead of that. And Cruise has been doing some demo rides in San Francisco recently, again, without a driver in the car. So there are other companies that are arguably there. There's low speed shuttles that are operating. They have a guide, but the shuttle spends most of its time driving itself. So lots of other companies are making impressive progress. And the Tesla is still saying, hey, it could do the worst thing at the worst time, while the other companies say, no, we don't need a driver. It's got it.
What do you drive? You don't have to tell me the model. Just tell me the manufacturer. I'm putting you in the Volvo category.
Oh, you got it right, but maybe not for the reason you thought.
What do you mean? But I come from a safety, not from a political perspective.
I actually went to Gothenburg and visited the engineers in Sweden that do the Volvo safety. And I was so impressed with their safety culture that when I got home, it was time for a new car. I bought a Volvo.
Wow. Okay.
And my neighbor
what did
said,
you mean?
You know, Phil, most people just kick the tires. So.
Right. No, most people get in and they play with the radio. I'm in that category and I got the car anyway. Dr. Koopman, that was excellent. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.